Hello, this is my End Times Bible study. This is focusing on, this first part is focusing on what is going on now, what I think will happen next, kind of where we are right now. And I want to do another study on the rapture specifically and on Revelation, but this one is part one, what's next. So here are the context for these passages. Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple area. They point out to Jesus the beauty of the temple, and he tells them something kind of startling, that not one stone will remain upon another. And so then he asks these questions of Jesus. And so the first one there, Matthew 21, verse 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? And Mark, they ask these questions, and in Luke they ask these questions. So when he tells them this, the temple is going to be destroyed, they want to know two questions. When is this going to happen? When's the temple going to be destroyed? And what kind of signs can we see for the end of the world and when you return? So everything that's going to follow, there's going to be a few passages that's going to be about the sorrows, which I want to get to in a minute. But everything after that is going to answer these two questions. So Matthew 24, this is how he begins his reply. So this is the sorrows part before he gets into the answering the actual questions. So he tells them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So he doesn't really answer the question. Again, he's starting to answer, but he's not getting to what they've actually asked. Mark 13 kind of goes hand in hand with Matthew. And here he says, And Jesus answering them began to say, Take heed lest any man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And when ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, be ye not troubled, for such things must needs be. But the end shall not be yet, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be earthquakes in divers places, and there shall be famines, and he adds the word troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. Now when I say that Matthew and Mark kind of go hand in hand, I'm talking about everything after the beginning of sorrows. They are answering the same questions. Luke's a little bit different. He's going to answer a different question. Luke also has the same set of beginning of sorrows section, and it begins with Jesus speaking, and he said, Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not therefore after them. So this recollection adds the command not to go after them. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified. Previously it was be not afraid, or be not troubled. This is be not terrified. For these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. And this is also added there at the end. So again, the context, right? So we have the beginning of sorrows, which is everything that those three chapters just covered, that we just covered. And Luke 21, I mentioned how it's a little different than Matthew and Mark. So right after the passage about the beginning of sorrows, it says, but before all these. So when it says, but before all these, it means before the beginning of sorrows begins. And then it goes on to say, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. So what Luke is doing is answering the question from the very beginning, when shall the temple be destroyed? So Luke is covering that section of it. So before the beginning of sorrows, the temple is going to be destroyed, and that is where the but before all these comes into play. Now Matthew says, right after the beginning of sorrows, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Now, I think it's possible that this section right here, that then shall they deliver you up, could also be a part of the beginning of sorrows, or the very end of it, or just something connected to it, because the following paragraph is, and then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. But both of those words, then, and then the phrase and then, is implying that what Matthew is going to cover, and by extension Mark, is happening after the beginning of sorrows. So the beginning of sorrows, and then something else is going to happen. So whether that first then shall they deliver you up, whether that's actually connected to the beginning of sorrows or not, either way, you have Luke's content about the destruction of the temple, and then at some point after that is going to be the beginning of sorrows, and then at some point after that is going to be the rest of Matthew and Mark. So that's the organization. So if you read through Luke and Matthew and Mark, you could think easily that they're talking about the same events, but they're not talking about the same events. It's clearly talking about two different series. And if you go back to the context, those questions that they asked Jesus, when is the temple going to be destroyed? What are the signs of your coming and the end of the world? Luke is answering the temple question, and Matthew and Mark are focusing on the end of the world and his second coming. So to summarize, what all three of these chapters have in relation to each other in terms of the beginning of sorrows is there's a deception, false Christ deceive, wars and rumors of wars, be not troubled, be not terrified, the end is not yet, nation versus nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now what's interesting about nation versus nation is the Greek word implies a race. So race against race, tribe against tribe, whereas the kingdom would reference nation against. So again, nation is implying race, kingdom implying kingdoms like nations or realms. There's earthquakes in many places, diverse places, famines, pestilences. Mark adds the word troubles, and Luke adds fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Now, something I want to compare this to are the seven seals. Now, I've got the seven up there, but I'm really just going to focus on the 6 seals. And the first 6, the 7th seal is, I believe, a half an hour of silence in heaven. And basically, every 7th judgment is a setting up of the next 7 judgments. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and just read. It's chapter 8, the first 2 verses, the 7th seal. And when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. So that ushers in the 7 trumpets. And what's interesting is after the 6th seal, there's a little bit of a break. It kind of goes off topic a little bit. But we're going to focus on the 6 seals and kind of see what they have to say. So the first seal is the white horse. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. Now I believe the bow is representative of a covenant, very much as God's rainbow is a covenant. You will also see that the white horse is very similar to the description of Jesus at his second coming, where he's on a white horse, and Jesus has, I believe it references many crowns as opposed to just a single crown, which I believe refers to, this horseman refers to the Antichrist. I believe that the conquering is going to be done as through peaceful means or diplomatic means. And you do see that in Daniel 9, that the Antichrist will make a covenant with many. So I believe that the first seal will be the allowing of the Antichrist to begin to take power. So the second seal is the red horse, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. I believe this refers to war. For starters, there's the symbolism of a sword. There is to take peace from the earth. So I think this adds to the belief that the first horseman is a conqueror through peaceful means. So there must have been peace in order for peace to be taken. So I believe the first one is the Antichrist. The second one is a war of some type. And the third seal is the black horse. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And behold, and I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. I believe this refers to famine. And I believe the idea here is that a penny would be a day's wage. So you're getting a little bit of food for what equates to a lot of work. And the idea that you couldn't get the oil or the wine is going to be reserved for those that have a lot of money. So it's going to be kind of held back. So I believe that the third horse, the black horse, is representing famine. The fourth seal is a pale horse. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. And I believe the way the Greek word for this pale horse is refers to a sickly pale green color. I believe that this is a pestilence. And the beasts of the earth, it could be just wild animals or just animals in general, but I believe it could also be microorganisms, viruses, bacteria, and the such. So the four horsemen, something I want to bring kind of together. This little part here, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with beasts of the earth. Now, about a fourth part of the earth, the fourth part of the population of the earth, is roughly around 2 billion people. So I believe what this is saying, to kill with such items over the fourth part, would mean almost 2 billion dead within the first 4 seals. So again, kill with sword, representing the red horseman of war, hunger, the black horseman of famine, and the death beast, the pale horseman of pestilence. You'll also notice the white horseman is not represented in the death part, I believe, again, further suggesting a peaceful or diplomatic means of gaining power. The fifth seal. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. And this is referencing to martyrs. The sixth seal. And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell on to the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man hid themselves in the dens, and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who should be able to stand? So I believe what we're seeing here is earthquakes and signs in the heavens, fearful sights. So what exactly is the beginning of sorrows in relation to the sealed judgments? How do we compare these? So the sealed judgments, you have the false Christ, war, famine, pestilence, martyrs, great earthquake, signs in heaven. At the beginning of sorrows, remember, Jesus said that there would be a false Christ, wars, rumors of war, famine, pestilence, martyrs, and this is where martyrs might be a little iffy here. If you remember in Matthew, Jesus says, these are the beginning of sorrows, and then it says, then they shall deliver you up, and that's the martyr section. So maybe that's a PS to the beginning of sorrows, maybe it's connected to the beginning of sorrows, or maybe it's meant to be excluded. I don't know, but I tend to put it with it, because the next passage after the then shall they deliver you up is the and then section of it. So I think the and then is the moving away from the beginning of sorrows and beginning to talk about the rest of what he has to talk about. But just in case it's not, I think this is too much of a coincidence to ignore, and I wanted you to be aware of. Maybe it's not really meant to be with the beginning of sorrows, but I think it's very close and connected to it, at the very least. And then also the great earthquake and signs in heaven. So this is what we're looking at. Is Jesus' description of the beginning of sorrows meant to be a description of the first 6 seals of the tribulation period? In that we would have birth pains, the tribulation period officially begins, and then the seal judgments begins, which are also the beginning of sorrows. The beginning of sorrows referencing the tribulation period. Could it be that? This is where I think we are. We have the beginning of sorrows, everything we've talked about, sort of like a birth pain, and then at some point in the near future, the tribulation period is going to officially begin, and with that, the seal judgments. And the way to look at the seal judgments, I believe, is to think about how Jesus is the King of Kings. There's many kings, but there's only Jesus as the King. And I believe that there's the seal judgments. What the beginning of sorrows is a reflection of that, a mirror of those judgments. So that it's a setting of the stage, so to speak, preparing the way. And that's why they're so similar in nature. What you have is a situation of false labor pain, like women can have like a false labor, or they might have some discomfort, but they're not officially in labor, or it's not to a point where, time's up, but you have stuff building and it gets worse and more frequent until the point comes where it's too late. When now time is up, the baby is coming. And I believe that's what the beginning of sorrows is. It's the time before time up. And the start of the tribulation period is time's up. Famines, for example, I think the UN is estimating upwards of 300 million are facing famine conditions. China is being hit very hard. There's locusts flying around destroying crops. The coronavirus turned some countries that are already reliant on imports for their food no longer have that option. And then you throw in the locusts. It's a bad situation. I think we're going to see that strike this fall, and I think we're going to see the signs in the heavens that Luke mentioned. I don't know what that's going to be like. Some people might argue that it's the 4 blood moons, and everyone kind of made a big deal about that a while ago. Or there may be something else, but I think that's kind of where we're at right now, the beginning of sorrows. Now I'm going to transition. That's kind of where I think we are right now, but there's still some events that could happen, I think, between now and the beginning of the tribulation period. And I just want to cover those so that you're aware of what potential events that could still take place before it officially kicks off. So this first event will be the War of Gog and Magog. It's from Ezekiel. And I kind of want to look at basically the idea is that at some point Israel is going to have a measure of safety and peace, and several nations are going to gather together and come try to destroy them. So I want to answer a couple questions on this how first, from Ezekiel 38:4. So this is God talking, or he's sharing to Ezekiel, and say, "Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal," and I'm probably going to mispronounce a lot of these words. "And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy mouths, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords." In other words, I think God is spoiling for a fight. I think this is a very unique time period that God is going to let people know that he exists, and it's going to be very dramatic, and this is one of these events that's going to be very dramatic. Who's involved, and this is it's kind of a complicated way to do that, figure this out, because you got to figure out where did these people settle, where are these nations from, that they've had different name changes over the years. Borders have shifted. I mean, it's really hard to tell. These are my best guesses based off what I could find. Some of this is for sure, some of this is maybe. So bear with me. So one of the for sures is Persia, which is Iran. That's pretty universally accepted. You have Cush. You might find Cush in the Bible, or it might just say Ethiopia, which is going to represent Ethiopia. I've also seen where it could reference the parts of Sudan. You have Libya and Put. You might also see Put in there, these are, I believe, referencing Libya. Gomer, I've seen it reference Germany and Russia and Turkey, like the northern part of Turkey, southern parts of Russia. So that one's I'm not real sure about. But for sure, Turkey is going to be in this. Togarmah, or you might see like Beth Togarmah. The Meshach, Tubal, and Magog is referencing Russia. Now, I've seen also maps where it references northern Turkey or bits of Turkey. But I believe that there's some of Russian history references back to some of the people that would have lived in this area. So I believe it's also referencing Russia, or could reference Russia. But I think so far Iran and Turkey are the for sures. Ethiopia, Libya are right up there with it. Sudan, I think, is pretty close there. I personally believe Russia will be included. If not, there is a passage that says many peoples with you. So I believe that all of these are going to be the nations, but it could be other nations. It could be ones not listed. I've heard some people talk about it could also include the Afghanistans of the world, the parts around there. But like I said, it's kind of tricky to try to figure out where all these people settled and what areas they're talking about and how that transitions into modern day borders and nations. All right, so for the why, can we kind of talk about the how? God's going to make these people do this, but why is he doing it? This is still verse Ezekiel 38. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages, and this is Israel. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil. And here's the reason why. They're going to have this evil thought to take a spoil. They're going to see a nation that is feeling safe and unprepared, and they're going to assume they're unprepared. They won't expect it. And they want to take the property, take their land, to spoil them. And to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. Now, it's interesting, gathered out of the nations. One of the things that people in the news and in the world don't really talk about is Israel becoming a nation again, is Bible prophecy coming to pass. And this isn't even the best passage for that. But they're gathered out of the nations, and now they're going to come to this point in time where they're going to feel safe. Now verse 13 is very interesting for what's going on at the moment. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? To carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? Now, as near as I could tell, the Sheba and Dedan area is the area of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. A couple of these nations have just normalized their relations with Israel, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that it is Bible prophecy coming true. I think that these nations in that area are not going to be participating, but they're going to be speaking on it, but they're not going to participate. They're not going to be actively fighting against Israel, but there's no indication here that they're going to stop it either, nor they are they going to necessarily be wanting to, given how large of an army is going to come up against Israel? Now, I've heard that Tarshish could reference England and whatnot, and the young lions could be kind of the younger countries in relation to this part of the world. This might also reference America. Again, it's one thing to have a friend in Israel, an ally, but when you have so many nations, especially if Russia is involved, then you're turning in, if America were to get involved, it then becomes a world war. It becomes a much bigger war. It becomes something that a nuclear weapon could be used. And this is already going to be devastating, but if you think about it, why would America not get involved? That would be a reason why. And they continue with the why, and it shall come to pass, this is still in chapter 38, at the same time when Gog shall come up against the land of Israel, saith the Lord God, that my fury shall come up in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea, and the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the field, and all creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth, shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. So clearly this is not going to be just the average kind of a war. So part of the reason why you have an evil thought entering their minds, they're coming to take a spoil, but it's also because God is bringing them down, and he's bringing them down because he wants to let the world know that he's a living God, that he is in control. When you see a statement like fury shall come up in my face, he really seems to be taking this seriously. I would not want to be one of these nations coming up against Israel. And this next verse here in verse 21, and I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. When God is calling for a sword against you, I would be concerned. And then in verse 22, and I will plead against him. Usually when you plead with somebody, you're asking them to do something. You can almost be begging them not to do this or do that. This is how God will plead with them. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with him, and overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. And here's the kicker. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So this is the end of the world kind of events. I mean, it seems to me that this is something that's going to take place very near the end, where God is making it known, like he's drawing the line in the sand. And in verse 39, here's the results. In chapter 39, verse 9. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows and the handstaves and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. So there's going to be so much stuff left over from this war that for 7 years they could burn it all and have basically have a fire going for nonstop. So that they shall take no wood out of the field, neither cut down any out of the forest, for they shall burn the weapons with fire, and they shall spoil those that spoil them, and rob those that rob them, saith the Lord God. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will give unto Gog a place there of graves in Israel, the valley of the passengers on the east of the sea, and it shall stop the noses of the passengers. And there shall they bury Gog and all his multitude, and they shall call it the valley of Hamon Gog. And 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying of them, that they may cleanse the land. So not only will be enough material to burn, to turn into power for 7 years, but there will be so many dead bodies that it'll take 7 months to bury them and cleanse the land. So a very, very devastating war. Now, when will this happen? I don't know. I tend to lean towards a very early, either right before the tribulation period or the start of it, I should say, or right after. This could be the war from the second seal. Or it could be a war that leads into the Antichrist making that covenant with everybody. Either way, I think it's going to be something that is going to happen around the start. Once the second seal hits and there's war to take peace from the land, I don't think Israel is going to feel at peace. So I think it's going to happen either during that first seal going into the second seal, where the peace is broken, or before the peace is ever made. So again, either during the time directly before the tribulation period begins, or perhaps the second seal. Some have believed it to be towards the end. I don't think that makes sense. I think it's going to be early, but it's hard to pinpoint it. God's not specific on when this is going to happen. And that brings us to the last event that could happen in the near future. I do believe that the rapture will happen prior to the tribulation period beginning. So this could be an event that happens any day now. There are 4 basic views. There's the pre-tribulation, which is what I am. There is the mid-trib, which is about halfway. There's the 3/4. Some call it the pre-wrath, but basically it's prior to the last 7 judgments. So a little bit past midway. And then there's the post-tribulation, which they would believe that the rapture takes place at the same time as the second coming of God, or the second coming of Jesus, at the very end of the tribulation period. So my question is, can Jesus come back today? If you say yes, it is because you are a pre-trib person. If you say no, you are not a pre-trib person. You must be one of the others. Pre-trib is the only view that states that that Jesus can come back today. Every other has to have either half the tribulation, 3/4 of the tribulation, or the entire tribulation period take place prior to his arrival. And so for the basis of the rapture, there's a couple passages to read here in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and the mortal must put on immortality. So what we see is a changing, that not all is going to die. That's what the word sleep is referencing, is death. But we all want to be changed so that we can go into the next phase with an incorruptible body. And then, of course, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Now, before I get to this, I am going to do another one of these studies specifically about the rapture, and I'm going to get into it in a lot more detail. And I'm going to spend a lot of time with it, but I'm going to try to break this down a little bit just to kind of point out what it's saying here. So this whole section kind of goes together. It's bookend, and what I want to go first here in verse 13 is kind of the context. But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, considering them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. So the context is, the point of these passages is, he wants them to know what's going on. He does not want them to be sorrowful or have no hope. And specifically, he's talking about those that have died, so which are asleep. So he wants them to be aware of what is going on, what is going to happen, and not to be sorrowful over it. So that's the context. And then verse 14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. So when Jesus comes back for this event, those that have died, he's going to bring back with him. So they're going to join him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord. So this is coming from God. This is not something that Paul just decided to make up. That we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout. So if he's coming from heaven, then we already know he's bringing the dead with him. With the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. So those souls that he's bringing, they're going to be they're going to be given those bodies, those incorruptible bodies from 1 Corinthians. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds. So there's going to be a reunion in the clouds with those that have passed on. Again, the context is they are sorrowful and over those that have died. They're concerned. He does not want them to be concerned. He wants them to understand that just because they have died does not mean that they're not going to participate in this event. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. So that's the context. And wherefore comfort one another with these words is the bookend for what started this whole passage. So with that said, let's kind of just examine this for a second. So one thing I want to point out is if this is the same event as the second coming, which the difference between the rapture and the second coming is the rapture is that we're all going to be gathered together in the air to meet Jesus and we'll be with him where he is. The second coming is Jesus is returning with everybody, with us in our incorruptible bodies. He is going to touch the earth again. He is going to land on the earth. He is going to destroy his enemies. He's going to set up his millennial kingdom. The Antichrist will be thrown into the lake of fire. Satan will be bound and thrown into the bottomless pit. He will be on the earth. That is not the same. So he will come to where we are and stay where we are. The rapture is we will be gathered together and we will go to be with him where he is. Now think about this. If this is referencing a mid, a three-quarter, or a post-trib situation, they should not, what this should read is, don't be sorrowful, be without hope. It is better to be dead prior to this period, because this is going to be hell on earth. There will be literally demons running about, falling angels everywhere. There's going to be horrific things. It is better to have died prior than to be alive during this time period and suffering the way you're going to suffer. It doesn't say that. It says comfort one another with these words. So I don't think those other viewpoints make a little bit of sense, make any kind of sense with this. I think the only thing that makes sense is it's going to happen prior to the tribulation period, because otherwise it's better to be dead. Not that you should go harm yourself in any way or you should go put yourself in unsafe situations, but the ones who should be sorrowful are for yourselves for going through it, because it's going to be that horrible. And we talked about the seals a little bit. 2 billion people dead in the first 4 seal judgments. Things get much, much worse. Much worse. Horrific locusts, horsemen, armies on horseback with horrific horses and people dying everywhere, and then you throw in the Antichrist and the mark of the beast, and it just gets progressively worse, and it's not going to be the place you want to be. So they shouldn't be sorrowful over this, because it would be better to be dead in a way, because if you're dead, you're with Christ. I mean, you see it here. He's going to come back with them. In verse 14, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. So he's bringing them back. So they're safe and sound. So then why does he say it this way? He says it this way because they are concerned that they're going to miss the rapture, that they're not going to be given these bodies, that they're not going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye. They're concerned they're going to stay dead while they get to live on. You see what I'm saying? This is not something that's being described as people who are going to have to go through the tribulation period. This is something being described of people being concerned with those that have passed on, missing a wonderful, glorious event, the return of Jesus to gather his church up and remove them prior to the worst time in human history. Now, I will say this to illustrate my point. This time period is going to be worse than Noah's flood. and I can prove it. This time period, these last 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel, commonly referred to as the tribulation period. The Bible is specific. It says that except those days were shortened, no flesh would live. So if God does not shorten these last 7 years, if he does not shorten the days, actually shortens time, allows the days to go by faster, everything would die on the planet. During the flood, God did not need to shorten those days. He created a safe place for his people, for the animals. He did not need to shorten anything. This is a different thing. This is going to be much, much worse. Everything is going to die. But because he is loving and he's trying to give us a chance, he is going to shorten the days. With that in mind, does these passages sound like don't be sorrowful or lack hope, because you're going to go through the worst time in human history? There's never going to be anything worse than this. It doesn't. It doesn't read this way. It wasn't written this way. I don't think it was ever intended to be that way. Now I'll get into more specifics on the whys and whatnot in that specific chapter, or in that specific lesson. But for right now, just looking at these two sections and knowing that about the flood and these last days, I believe fully that we are not going to be here for that. We might see the war of Gog and Magog. We're going to see the birth pains leading up to the tribulation period. We're going to be seeing the stage being set. It cracks me up when I see a sign that says no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service. Because I know there's going to come a day when that word mask is going to say mark. I know that everything that's going on, I see it all leading to this worst period in human history that's ever been on the earth. And people get so caught up in, oh, someone's anti-science, or there's this or that, but it's not that. It's the world's coming to an end, and people are concerned about things that are the least of our concern. We're spiraling down this path of no return. Time is almost up. I believe it is so much closer than we can imagine. I am not one, and it seems like everybody that talks about this time period will say this phrasing. I am not setting dates. It's required to say that. But what's interesting is those that have read this book and read Revelation, we all feel it, we all see it. We just don't know when. We don't know almost what to do sometimes. Do we continue praying? And I mean, absolutely, we continue praying, we continue fighting for doing what's right. But at the same time, we know what's coming, and it's a difficult situation to be in. But this is where we are right now. I believe we're right in the middle of the beginning of sorrows. I think there's a war coming that's going to be horrific. And I think that there's a rapture coming that's going to be horrific for some, because it's going to mean that you're going to go into this time period that is meant to destroy. It is meant to shake the world, and specifically Israel, to its very core, in one last attempt to turn you towards God. So my hope and prayer is that you don't wait until you see demon locusts and evil spirits inhabiting the earth and walking the earth and demonic horsemen. And my hope and prayer is that you also see it. You do not have to believe what I am saying. You can open the book of Revelation. You can open Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. You can read these things for yourself. And you can see for yourself what is coming and then compare it to where we are. We have deceptions, we have wars, we have rumors of wars. If China and India does not go to war soon, it will be a miracle. They're killing each other. And that's just that. I mean, there's still Israel, and people don't like Israel. I mean, there's so much going on in the world. It's lining up too perfectly. Now, I hope that I trust that God's going to give us enough time for those that need to be saved to get saved. But I also know that there is a cutoff there, and that at some point he's going to cut it off, and then it's not going to be too late for some, but oh, you're going to hate it. You're going to hate it so bad. It's not going to be good. And you're going to have a much more difficult time. When that mark shows up and you can't eat and you can't work because you don't have a mark, or you're going to take that mark, and if you take that mark, it's too late. If nothing else, do not take that mark. I know people are flipping out over vaccines. If that vaccine is not in your right hand or forehead, it's not the mark of the beast. So if they put it into your left arm or your bicep or in your hip, it's not the mark of the beast. Don't freak out over it. But there's coming a day when that sign's going to say no shirt, no shoes, no mark, no service. And they're not going to let you work if you don't have it. I think that's all I have today. I will try to answer questions if I find a way to send it to me. Good luck, and I love you.